Let's go ahead and get started here with the last lecture. You can't hear. Are you doing this? Sorry. Better? Good afternoon. I'm Sean Schmidt. I'm chair of the Apron Committee. Welcome to the 2014 Apron. Part of what I get to do right now is thank some folks that have done a lot to help put on this day. Because this doesn't just happen by magic. Even though I tell my students sometimes it's magic, right? But they're shaking their head yes, but we know it's not. On the back of the program here, you'll notice a list of folks that have done and given one way or another, time, effort, money, whatever. And as soon as you start putting together these thank you lists, what happens? You leave somebody off. And if you just came from the oral presentations, we were in the School of Law, and we forgot to put their name here. We're apologizing. Thank you, School of Law. You guys are wonderful. Another very important group is the Apron Committee, which is on page 29 of this thing, of the program. And can we go ahead and give them a round of applause for what they've done? Looking at the program, I found I'm actually in the program in two different places. And to me, the more important place is on page 31, which is the list of mentors. So a couple weeks ago, we were giving tours around Stouffer Hall. And one of the things that we have to do when we're giving tours at Stouffer Hall is we have to show off the bust of Earl Sutherland, who, as most of you probably know, Nobel Prize in Physiology Medicine, graduate of the chemistry department. What'd you say? Chemistry department. Physiology. So it's all good. It's all wonderful. So one of the people on the tour asked me, so when am I going to get my Nobel Prize? And I told him, well, it's probably a little late for me, but I'll be happy when my student does. And I think that's kind of the idea that of most of the mentors here. It's not about what we do. Yes, we want to contribute to the body of knowledge, but it's about our students and what they do. So if you're a mentor, could you stand up so we could acknowledge you for not only for what you do for your students, but also for what you do for your students, but also because of the intellectual atmosphere that you give to this campus. We really appreciate it. So the other group that we should acknowledge are the students. We could have the students stand up now and applaud. We could do that, certainly. A lot of the students aren't here right now, but you'll see them on campus later on. Please take the time to shake their hand, congratulate them, tell them something that you learned from what they've done. I mean, we talk about this idea of reverse classroom. That is a reverse classroom next door where now they're the teachers teaching us, and that's just a wonderful thing. Okay? A couple more things that we get to do right now. I'm going to introduce Regina Castle. She's going to come up and do a couple poster awards, and then John Mulligan's going to come up, and we're going to start the last lecture because that's why you're here. So thank you for coming.
Good afternoon. It's always my pleasure to recognize students, especially when they're mine. And this semester in the Creative Media Practicum class, we are a small but mighty class. I can go from up to 18 students. And this semester I have 6, which is amazing for grading, right? But thankfully, I do have some really talented students in this group. And so the posters that you maybe saw around campus, we have this one, and then to say, please sign up to do Apron, and this one, now that you've signed up, please come. And so I would like to present the first poster, our nice thing, to Emily Youngke. And the second to Carly Willis. So if you ladies will come up and be recognized. And now John.
Just make sure it's on. Can you hear me okay? Congratulations to Emily and Carly for their outstanding work. Thanks to Sean and Regina as well. So it's a privilege and an honor to introduce Dr. Mary Bugs McCoy for the 2014 Apron last lecture. I've known Mary since I joined the campus 15 years ago as a new faculty member in the biology department. Actually, we met when I interviewed, and I think it was she who convinced the department to actually take a chance and hire me. So very thankful for that. I was also very fortunate that her office was right next door to mine, because I witnessed firsthand how terrific she was when she interacted with students, colleagues, and others who visited her. Excuse me. On a personal and professional level, Mary was and remains today a tremendous resource for me, and her mentoring got me through those early years. I have many great memories with Mary, although I can't probably share most of those right now. As you can read in your Apron program, Mary was an outstanding faculty member at Washburn for 33 years, retiring 5 years ago to pursue her other life's passions, notably writing, art, and the conservation and protection of all, especially endangered species. She was appropriately awarded 2 significant university teaching awards during her time at Washburn, the Ned and Fleming Excellence in Teaching Award in '93, and the Herrick Award for Outstanding Service in 1999. Mary also directed the Washburn Faculty Development Program for 4 years. Her master's and Ph.D. degrees are from KU in entomology, and her professional work as an entomologist and educator aside, Mary is an exceptionally talented writer and artist, and she honed these talents by taking Washburn classes from some of her former colleagues, some of whom are here today. Mary gave me an advanced copy of her talk, and I'm thrilled to hear Mary describe her life among bugs in her words today. I got chills reading the draft and promise not to steal her thunder. In short order, though, you will clearly understand and appreciate the title of her talk and why she is affectionately known as Bugs. I truly hope that this is not her last lecture. Please welcome Dr. Mary Bugs McCoy.
No, I'll be okay, I think. And yeah, good. Okay. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I thank Dr. Sean Schmidt for his invitation, and it was rather gutsy because he suggested I could talk about whatever I wanted to. And I thank Dr. Mulliken for his kind introduction and for helping me run the projector, which is sometimes a challenge. And if Dr. Price is here, Lucy, I want to thank her too as a guest and a technical advisor. And I also want to thank the committee who set and all of the good work that they did to provide this this wonderful event today. So this is my talk called Reflections on My Life Among Bugs. We seem to be having the usual
buzz, but we also unplugged the projector.
Oh, shoot. Well, we might have to put up with the buzz.
Yeah, we'll deal with the buzz. Excuse us?
Yes, okay. This always happens. You can't have a talk without this. Oh.
Hopefully this won't be a tradition.
Okay, I see a red light.
We have life.
Okay,
Yeah,
excellent.
sorry.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll wait on the images. And John, I'll just say next image when it's time. Okay, so I suspect the only thing that people will remember about my 33 years here is that I used to cook insects in class. I remember walking down the Morgan Hall one day when an administrator came towards me, and he was escorting an important visitor to the campus, and he steered him over to me and he said, "Meet Dr. McCoy, she cooks bugs." And I don't really mind having this reputation. In fact, I kind of enjoy it. If you can eat an insect and survive, and perhaps even find it tasty, then you might be able to accept a lower level of pesticide residue on your produce, or buy some fruit that might have a little bit of insect damage to it. Actually, mealworms can be pretty good if they're cooked in a wok with butter and garlic. But I recommend against eating crickets because their spines tend to be caught in your teeth. I also used to walk around with a live tarantula on my shoulder, which I think is what the picture is about, but that's another story. So this summer I will reach 3/4 of a century of age, and so I have things to say. I'm going to reflect on 2 topics which have been important in my life, and I'm just going to tell stories, and each one has a moral. So the first story I'm going to tell, and the first topic, is the subject of tenacity and how I learned about its importance. This story begins 50 years ago, back in the 60s, when I was in graduate school at the Department of Entomology in Lawrence at the University of Kansas. The students back in those days, in the 60s, in the entomology department were composed of 30 men and 1 woman twice my age and me. I was taking a fascinating course in medical entomology, and at one point the professor started talking about a blood-sucking bug which occurs in Central and South America. First image, please. And this is the bug. Its range extends into the southern United States. It carries a really horrible disease, a trypanosome disease, protozoan disease, next image, called Chagas disease. And this is the organism in among red blood cells. Next image. The bug feeds on its human host or other mammalian hosts, sucks up a lot of blood, swells up like a tick, and often poops right on the site, which is what that bug is doing. And the trypanosomes are carried in the poop and will be transferred to the feeding wound or through the eye. So this subject spoke to me. I wondered if these bugs occurred around Lawrence, and perhaps if they did, would they possibly be carrying the dreaded Chagas disease? What a great problem. Soon a very prominent professor in our department stopped me in the hall to talk about my proposed project. He said these insects don't occur around Lawrence, and I was stupid to pursue this project. Or perhaps he said the project itself was stupid. At any rate, the word stupid was used. And so what does one do in such circumstances? Well, I started looking for the blood-sucking bugs around Lawrence. These are hemipterans, true bugs. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. Will the person in the back come and sit down, please? This is Dr. Price, is that right? Whom I thanked earlier. Yes, thank you for your technical advice. So I started looking for these bugs around Lawrence. So they're hemipterans with piercing, sucking mouth parts. They are there's a subgroup of them that are called the assassin bugs, and these assassin bugs are predators. But there's a subgroup of the assassin bugs which feed on mammalian blood. And this was my target, the blood-sucking cone-nosed Triatoma sanguisuga. So it was hot and humid in Lawrence in that summer back in the 60s, of course. I learned to focus on searching wood rat nests. Next image. This is the eastern wood rat, Neotoma floridana, and they build nests or lodges in our area. Next image. And these are piles of sticks. They may be built at the bases of trees or up in trees or in rocky outcrops. And so I had to learn how to find these nests, and I took them apart very carefully looking for the bugs. No bugs. And then I started looking for nests that were currently occupied by wood rats because that made a difference, and I took them apart carefully and no bugs. And I looked around Lawrence for a long time, and there were no bugs. And so I thought perhaps this project was stupid. One day I was investigating a rocky outcrop on the wooded West Campus part of KU, and I was crouched over, walking sideways like a crab under a thorny Osage orange tree, facing a rocky outcrop. when suddenly I saw 2 feet away from my face a copperhead lying there on the rocks. And I froze, and it froze, and we looked at each other for a while. And then it finally slithered off, I don't know, bored or annoyed, but it left. And I collapsed under the tree, breathing hard, and I thought, yes, this really is stupid. Then on one amazing day, I took apart a wood rat lodge and turned over a piece of bark, and there it was, Triatoma. I had found it. I had looked 2.5 months in the field, but I found Triatoma, the medically important blood-sucking bug that wasn't supposed to occur in that area. So was this search for 2.5 months tenacity, or stubbornness, or a lack of viable alternatives, or perseverance? I don't know, but I'm going to call it tenacity because it worked. After several more months, I had a decent-sized colony that I could go ahead and use for my research. One more slide, please, John. This is one more wood rat nest there. An epilogue to this story is that I lost most of this colony on Thanksgiving Day in a weird and dumb accident in which the lab rat that was supposed to be the source of food for the bugs — no rats are hurt in this process, by the way — escaped and ate all of the bugs that were supposed to feed on it. It was an ironic twist on Thanksgiving Day to have such a feast for the rat. And so what do you do when you lose your colony on Thanksgiving Day? Well, you go out and do field work all through December in Kansas, which I did. And again, I established my colony enough that I could proceed on my research. I think this story is quite appropriate for the Acheron meeting today, because many years later, when I became a faculty member here, I had 4 students one semester who wanted to do research, and we decided to do field work. And so with a lot of effort, we searched through this area, spending a lot of time, and we found the Triatoma bugs in Dornwood Park. And they set up a poster session here, complete with a lab rat and the blood-sucking bugs and a big part of a wood rat nest, and I was really proud of them. So the moral of this story is, and it's my first point, is again tenacity. Just keep trying. Every professor here knows tenacity very well because getting a Ph.D. requires a great deal of tenacity. You students who've been involved in your research also have been employing tenacity because it takes that to do research. You will need it as you go along through your lives in completing your degrees, in applying for jobs, in applying for advanced programs, in preparing for board exams, and all these other things. Just keep on trying, don't give up. My second topic is how I fell in love with the natural world and became passionate about protecting it. This is how it happened. It started when I was a kid. We lived in the country near Kansas City. We had no television. It had been invented, just barely. We're talking about the 40s and early 50s here, but we didn't have one yet. And so as a result of that, I spent most of my time outside, a lot of it up in trees. I was pretty arboreal, and a lot of it in nearby woods. One day, when I was 14, I was wandering alone in the woods and came upon a tree that was covered with hundreds of monarch butterflies. Next image. And I just stopped and stared, astonished. I wasn't sure what was happening here, but it was so beautiful. The light reflected off their wings. It looked like brilliant shards of glass in that fall light. And I wasn't quite the same person after I saw that. Later, in the early 80s, my teenage daughter and I traveled to Michoacan in Mexico, about 60 miles away from Mexico City. Next image. And this is, it was winter, and we rode burros high in the mountains at 10,000 feet. The mountains are covered with fir trees called Oyamal trees, and this is the monarch overwintering site. It's a small area. At that point, it was 30 by 50 miles across, and the monarchs from the United States and Canada had all flown there and were staying there for the winter. They had never been there before. They were those monarchs that we saw the third or fourth or fifth generation later from the ones that had left there the preceding spring. How they get there is a matter of intense research. But seeing millions of butterflies shifting the green furs to orange was an overwhelming sight. Next image, please. Thousands of them can cluster in a tree. Is there any problem with the sound, by the way? Can you all hear? Okay, so we can have thousands in a tree. Each one weighs less than a gram, and yet there are so many on these limbs, next slide please, that it can cause the limbs to droop. And this is what it looks like in that overwintering site in Michoacan, Mexico. When the sun shines on those cold winter days, the butterflies will fly around and you can actually hear the flutter of their wings. Years later, my Washburn students and I caught monarch butterflies and put little tiny tags with numbers on them as part of the Monarch Watch program. Please check out monarchwatch.org. monarchwatch.org. This program is centered in Lawrence. It's run by Chip Taylor, an insect ecologist. The research of this group focuses on understanding the migration of the monarchs and on protecting them. I know now that the monarch-laden tree that I saw when I was 14 was a nectaring assemblage. That is to say, the butterflies, when they're flying through here in the fall, will stop for a while, a week or two, and bulk up. They'll feed on the nectar in the surrounding areas, and then they'll fly after a while on farther south to Mexico. So my students and I, next slide, found these assemblages at, there's one more. We found the assemblages at Baker Wetlands, and were able to see these. The bad news is that the monarch numbers in the Mexican overwintering site are dropping precipitously. This spring, the total area that the monarch overwintering site exists in is 1.65 acres. 17 years ago, it was 52 acres. So again, it is now 1.65 acres, down from 52 acres 17 years ago. An important reason for this drop is GMO. This isn't talking about General Motors. This is genetically modified organisms. Much of our corn has been modified genetically to be able to withstand the herbicide Roundup. And that means that the herbicide can be sprayed liberally on cornfields, and it doesn't hurt the corn, but it kills other plants that are in the vicinity, including the milkweed, which the monarchs require as the larval food source. Egg production of the monarchs has dropped by 81% in recent 11 years, 81%. Roundup not only kills all the milkweed in the area, but it kills all the other plants that support a complex web of pollinating insects and other animals. The good news is that we can help solve this problem. We can plant milkweed in our yards and promote the monarch way stations. This is another part of monarchwatch.org. 17 species of milkweed grow in Kansas. Next slide, please. Last spring, I was ecstatic to find on my milkweed plants a big group of monarch butterfly larvae, yellow, black, and white, voraciously eating. They would soon pupate and emerge as adults and fly north and overwinter. Maybe 2 or 3 generations later, their descendants would fly back in the fall, and maybe they'd stop in Kansas for a while and hang out, and maybe they would make it all the way to Michoacan in Mexico. So the moral of this, and it's my second message, is if you don't know about these organisms, you can't care. And if you don't care about these organisms, you can't help to protect them and their ecosystems for future generations. I was really lucky that we had no television when I was a kid, and that I spent so much time outside, and that I found that tree that was covered with monarchs when I was 14. These factors shaped my love affair with biology and my fascination for insects. Richard Louv published a book in 2005 called The Last Child in the Woods, and in that he describes a condition he calls nature deficit disorder. He describes this as a situation in which the current generation of kids is not being outside very much at all, and as a result of that, their mental health and their physical health and their spiritual health is affected. My take on it is, again, that it's hard to care about things that you don't know about. My love affair with nature, my passion, flourished even more when I discovered the tropical rainforests. I made a few trips to Central and South America as ecotourist, but later I was able to have 2 sabbaticals which I was given by Washburn University, and they allowed me to go to, again, the tropical rainforest in Central and South America for long periods of time on my own. And these were truly life-saving events, and I'm very grateful to the university for those sabbaticals. On one sabbatical, I planned to travel to the lowland rainforests of Ecuador and stay for 6 weeks at an eco-lodge, not as a tourist, but as a researcher. Before I left, though, I discovered that the State Department had issued a travel advisory against Ecuador because of kidnappings that were occurring there, originating primarily from Colombia. I got a lot of mileage out of my colleagues by wondering if Washburn would pay a ransom for me if I were kidnapped. And they said things like, "Oh yeah," and "Yeah, right," and "Oh sure." But I went anyway. This was a very isolated lodge. You got there with a bunch of plane trips, a 2-hour motorized canoe trip, a trek through the forest, and then a trip in a dugout canoe. Money was tight. I stayed in a little tiny hot room way back from the lodge complex. I ate with the kitchen staff, mostly rice and beans, 3 times a day. Next image, please. I had no guide, and I began to explore the many trails in the dense forest. I did okay for the first few days, but then one day I got lost. When you're in the rainforest, it's wise not to leave the trail. I left the trail, I took some photos, I came back to the trail, and everything looked a little bit different, and I wasn't quite sure where I was, but it was 4 o'clock, and the forest starts getting dark at 4 o'clock, so I decided I should head back to the lodge. So I started on this long trek, and I walked, and I walked, and I walked, and I wasn't getting there, and my 99-cent compass from Walmart said I was going the wrong way, but my intuition said I was going the right way. And I like to pay attention to my intuition, but after walking a very long time, I decided to heck with the intuition, and I turned around and walked the opposite direction a very, very long way. I didn't want to be out at night. There are some scary, venomous things out at night. For example, there's a snake called the fer-de-lance, the famous 10-step snake. That's where if it bites you, you stagger 10 steps before you die. And so I wanted to get back to the lodge. And finally, I heard it, the barely audible hum of the generator. Never leave the path. So though I did get lost early on, after 6 weeks in the Ecuadorian rainforest, I knew my way through that forest very well. I could leave the trail with impunity. Here I was, a 63-year-old woman from Kansas, very much at home in the jungle. I felt I had become a part of the rainforest and that it had become a part of me. Next image, please. Here I am in the rainforest. Next image. I've had some exciting adventures in the rainforest. One night in Belize, I was blasted out of bed and staggered around by what sounded like a group of lions roaring right over my head. Next slide, please. And this is what it was. It was a troop of howler monkeys roaring right over my head. Next image, please. I have swum with a giant manta rays off the island of Tobago. I was there snorkeling, and I saw a school of rays far below me through my snorkel mask. And then in one mind-blinding moment, one of these rays started drifting up, and it came to be swimming about 2 feet beneath me. They have these big palps in the front that funnel water into the mouth, and its pointed side fins undulated hypnotically, and her eyes stared at me, and I stared at her, and we seemed to connect in some way with each other. And I swam a long way with this creature until my guide grabbed my ankle to keep me from going out into a strong cross current that might sweep me away. Next image, please. These slides, by the way, are from here on are ones that I have taken, and they're not all in Ecuador. These are capuchin monkeys from Costa Rica, but it's all I had for this particular part. So anyway, once I was in Ecuador, sitting quietly at my study site, when little bits of debris started falling down on me, and I looked up and I saw a troop of 75 squirrel monkeys going over my head very quietly. Next image. This is another capuchin. Next image. I have seen leafcutter ants in Belize by the hundreds carrying their leaf fragments through the forest. Next slide. Here's one in profile. It's perhaps hard to see. They go long distances with their leaves, and in this case carried them to a mound that was about 30 feet across. I have seen a howler monkey sitting in the fork of a tree cradling a baby in her arms. Next image, I've seen brilliant blue morpho butterflies flying over the ground in Ecuador. Next slide, I've seen some weird beetles. Next slide, I've seen some very large beetles. That's a very large beetle in my hand. Next image, please. The tropical, this is Nephila, one of my favorite giant spiders in the tropics. The tropical rainforest ecosystems are so important. They absorb a lot of carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, which is crucial in our time of global warming. They produce atmospheric oxygen. They produce a lot of water vapor. They are a vast repository of species. In Ecuador, which is the size of Colorado, there are 1,300 species of birds, and which is more than we have in this country and Canada combined. Next slide. Whenever I have entered a rainforest, some switch in my brain flips on. I am mesmerized by the forest's opulence and its rampant biodiversity and its exuberant excesses. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "Beauty is its own excuse for being." If you have a passion for nature, you don't have to go, though, to a tropical rainforest. In this country, we have a very riveting wildlife event occurring just up the road a ways in south central Nebraska. This is the Sandhill Crane migration, and it occurs every spring near Kearney, Nebraska. And it's the counterpart of the vast animal migrations which occur in Africa. I've witnessed this for the last 4 years. Next image. This is the Platte River near Kearney. It almost resembles the way it was described in the journals 100 years ago, a mile wide and an inch deep. Next image, please. Huge numbers of sandhill cranes funnel through Nebraska. 500,000 cranes go through an 80-mile stretch of the Platte River. They fly from the Gulf area, narrow into Nebraska, and then spread out into Canada and Alaska and Siberia. In the spring, then, they will migrate back. This is what they do in the spring. In the fall, they'll migrate back to the Gulf, but they spend March in Nebraska, and that's where they feed on waste corn in the fields. Next slide, please. This is one of my shots of the cranes in the cornfields in Nebraska. Next slide. These cranes are fascinating. When they're there in Nebraska, they're doing their courtship, and they have exquisite balletic dances. They pair for life, although some studies have shown that they have been known to cheat. Next slide. They, in their northern summertime habitat, they raise a tiny chick up to adult size and teach it to fly with the family south that coming fall. They live a long time. They're an ancient species, and they make this long, arduous migration twice a year. Next slide, please. At dusk, if you're near Kearney on the Platte River, by the way, I encourage you to see rowe.audubon.org. That's the name of the sanctuary where you can arrange trips to see these cranes from a blind. Again, it's rowe.audubon.org. So if you go to see the cranes, you can go into a blind. This is a very old blind. Next one. This is a pretty old blind. Next one. This is a more typical blind, wooden structure you go in to watch the cranes leave the cornfields and fly to the river at dusk. So they come there to escape the predators. They roost on the sandbars there and are protected by the water and their great numbers. Next slide, please. Here's what I have seen at the dusk near Kearney, Nebraska on the Platte River. This is where the cranes are coming in from the cornfields. And so there are 3 slides in succession here. They'll come in, you'll look out and see what looks like a black thread on the sky. It looks like another cloud. And then you see, though, it's getting closer and bigger, and it's the first group of cranes that are coming in for that dusk landing on the sandbars. And then you'll see another thread that will get closer, and it's another group of cranes, and then another group, and another group. And soon the sky is filled with these groups of incoming cranes. They land on the sandbars. Their sounds are loud and pervasive. They shoulder up right next to each other. Some of them fly directly overhead. Next slide. So they keep coming as the sun is setting. Next slide. They may fly overhead with a 6-foot wingspan showing. Sometimes they fly down from high in the sky in a helical spiral that resembles the very DNA of which we all share. Next slide, please. At dawn, and here they are resting on the river. So after this happens, okay, we'll stop there for a minute. After this happens, it gets dark and the cranes go to sleep. They're tightly packed into the sand bars. At dawn, if you go at 6 o'clock in the morning back to the blind, you see this enormous number of cranes take off where they'll go back to the cornfields and feed and court. Sometimes they'll rise in huge numbers, as is happening here. Now we'll look at the next 3 images beyond this. Next, next, next. This happens when a predator approaches, when they all lift off at once. This whole massive takeoff was produced by one eagle flying down the Platte River. The bad news about the Platte is that the water has been reduced by 70% in the last 100 years. It's been diverted for energy production and irrigation. Irrigated corn produces twice as much corn as non-irrigated corn. Corn planting has increased enormously to an area the size of the state of Indiana because of the ethanol mandate, and the ethanol mandate was part of the Clean Energy Act of 2007. A little upstream from the river's broad expanse at Kearney, the water narrows and there are no sandbars. And a little bit downstream, the water again narrows and there are no sandbars. So the cranes can't roost there. There have been 15 dams built on the Platte River. In the old days, before the dams were built, the torrent from the snowmelt of the Rockies washed these plants away. But as the water level has dropped down to 30% of its original amount, the plants encroach by plant succession. And so sometimes the water is very low. The good news is that in this particular part of the Platte, the river's been coaxed back to its old wide sandbar state. It's been dredged and disked and weeded by people who care about these birds and who tend their sanctuary. So the moral is, again, this: if you don't know about these ecosystems, you can't care about them, and if you don't care about them, you can't work to protect them for future generations. I have 2 granddaughters who are college age, and I want their granddaughters to be able to experience what I have experienced. Emily Dickinson wrote, "Hope is a thing with feathers." There are many ways to know more about our threatened ecosystems and to help protect them. Read, join the Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, the National Wildlife Foundation. There's an excellent course here at Washburn, Biology 203, Human Impact on the Environment, taught by Dr. Kellis Bayless. You can also join Washburn's environmental club, the EcoBods. Vote. And also vote. And by the way, vote. Jane Goodall said, "The greatest danger to our future is apathy." So yes, I've had this love affair with nature. I don't need to be in the tropics to appreciate it. I don't even need to be in Nebraska in March. I can just go out to the front of my house in the summer and look on the front there under my light and see whatever fabulous bugs have collected there. A jumping spider in the bathroom amuses me. A flock of Canada geese flying overhead stops me in my tracks. The first cicada trill of the summer delights me. A whole chorus of cicadas draws me outside, and if I time it just right at the end of the day, I can go out and hear the cicadas and also see the lightning bugs begin to flash together in one incredible episode. So I feel lucky that I've had this intense connection with nature. I know what Jane Goodall meant when she said, "Those who dwell among the beauties and mysteries of the earth are never alone or weary of life." So I am lucky and I am content. These are my reflections on my life among bugs and what I have learned from our multi-legged creatures: tenacity, a love of their world, and a passion to protect it. So thank you, and congratulations to you students for your good research projects, and to the good professors who have organized this event and mentored you. Thank you very much.
We have time for one question. Anybody have a question for bugs?
Do you still have a tarantula?
No, I gave them, one of them escaped and it was quite hard to find it. I spent a lot of time. I was afraid it would crawl up the stairs and get into bed and bite me, and I finally gave them to the Prairie Nature Park, the ones that I had left. The one that I loved, that I carried around on my shoulder all the time, is buried in my butterfly garden right now. Here.
Thank you so much
Oh,
for that
thank you.
outstanding presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Oh, we're supposed to stand there.
So we'd like to present this plaque, not to her. You can't have this. This will go in maybe library. It lists all the past last lecture speakers, and will be housed in Mayberry.
Okay, all right.
Thank you so
John.
much.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you. All right. Get out of here. Oops.
Take your time.
Get all my stuff.
So I just wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. So first of all, Mary was given an honorarium, and she was very kind to donate it back to the biology department for scholarship funds. So it's going to be added to the Jane Ayers McLeavy Scholarship Fund to support female students in the biological sciences. So thank you, Mary. She continues to give to our students in so many ways. So she continues to give to our students in so many ways, so we appreciate that. Again, thank you for attending the last lecture. It's my job now to invite you next door to the poster presentation and the reception. Thanks again.